Welcome to a bonus episode of Laid Off and Looking, and what you're hearing in the background isn't our theme.
No, that's actually the theme of Peacock's new hit comedy, The Paper.
We both watched all 10 episodes, and oh, have we got thoughts.
Oh my God, so many thoughts. So basically what it is the same documentary crew that filmed Dunder Mifflin in the iconic series The Office. They're now following the staff of the fictional Toledo Truth Teller, this struggling Midwestern newspaper. So here's a quick clip of the show.
My name is Ned Sampson. I am your new editor-in-chief.
Have you read this paper?
Uh-huh.
How do you think it compares to any other paper?
It sucks. But we are going to make it better. I hope it's not too disruptive to have me come in and sort of shake everything up.
Oh, no, don't be so self-defecating.
Welcome, volunteers, to your first staff meeting as reporters for the Toledo Truth Teller. How many of you have actually written for a paper before?
I wrote a paper in junior high.
Not quite the same thing.
I've tweeted.
You've tweeted?
I'm in a group text.
This is terrific. Let's show them how it's done. 7 highly motivated, tenacious Buckeyes are out there hunting for news. You'd be a fool to bet against that.
Before we get started, I'm Dom.
And I'm Jenna. And if you're new to listening to Laid Off and Looking, first of all, welcome. We usually cover journalism and media from around the world, but in this episode, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about The Paper. And as journalists, we're going to break down what the show gets right about the chaos and drama of a newsroom and what it's stretching maybe a little bit for comedy. Even though, honestly, having worked in a newsroom, there's comedy all the time.
There is.
So, Dom, let's get started. Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
breaking unemployment records.
Exactly. Just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many cups of coffee.
And maybe a few drinks.
We realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? I mean, we've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
are taking a critical look at American media. And Jenna, I think part for me was it's so interesting. Before I started the paper, I had so many thoughts of what was going to be like. You have the creator of The Office who's now doing this, and also it's about journalism. And I was like, what are they going to do here? And it sort of made me think about the other shows that preceded the paper. Things like from the 70s, you had the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was about a Midwest local news station that really was more about that it represented that time period of people working in news and working in jobs for long periods of time. It was a place that seemed stable. Well,
career
actually, there was that problem.
journalist.
But and then the 80s and 90s, you had Murphy Brown, which was this large news network show, and they had the money and they had the big, they had the fame. And then 2012 to 2014, we had the Newsroom, which was on HBO, and that was about a major news channel. It was an Aaron Sorkin political drama. Then 2019, we have Apple TV's The Morning Show, which is the behind the scenes of this popular morning show. Again, all of them represent this period of time of drama, and it made news seem really there's
respected.
Or the fact that it also was there was intrigue. There was the jobs, people had lots of money. Nobody was really questioned for how much money they were spending on these shows, except maybe the Mary Tyler Moore Show. But other than that, most of them weren't. So when I look at the paper, it's you have this downsized shell of a paper, what it once was. And, I find it fascinating because they even talk about, with the company, the company that owns the paper is this company that produces paper products and office supplies, janitorial paper. And they also own a local newspaper, which they, one of their project managers is It's the least valuable thing that we own is the local newspaper. And I think it really reflects the time that we're in for all of journalism, not just newspapers. It's representing of where we're at in this point of history, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it is. It is like, there's like, oh God, the fact that these used to be thriving businesses, and when I say thriving, I mean thriving in the sense of the number of people who were engaged and
Hmm.
employed. So we're talking about like this was something that you looked forward to on your morning news. I mean, like, the newspaper route. What's more American than that? Like you were looking forward to this
Hmm.
on your doorstep so you could find out what was going on in your community. And then, of course, there were all of the people who were gainfully employed who were passionate and became such experts on everything about their community from, not just the local government and the politics of it, but also, just God, I mean, everything from like farming to agriculture to healthcare to all of those things that
Hmm.
make our
Hmm.
local lives work. You had people who were experts in all of this. And even if they weren't an expert, they were connected to the people who were bringing the public this information. But of course, the one thing that wasn't thriving that we've learned through our podcast ever was the business model.
Exactly.
Or at least it fell off once
It fell.
advertising went to the digital space, to social
Yeah.
media.
And just before we even get deeper into like, we're not doing a recap of we're not doing recap episodes for everybody listening or watching on, we're not doing typical recap episodes. We're going to be basically talking about how this show relates to us and as journalists and where we're coming from with it. And a really good place, Jenna, is like what you're talking about here about what it used to mean, right? The model before it fell off the wheels. Part of when you start off on this show is they had this like 1971 mockumentary on the show, right? And it was about this. Remember, it was about the Toledo truth teller, and it was like showing what this once was, what this
Yeah.
now shell of a paper back in the 70s was this thriving 900 person organization. And I remember there was the interviewer asked the then publisher, John Stack, they asked him a question about like how expensive it is running this paper. And his quote was, you can bet what you're sitting on. What you can bet what you're sitting on it is. We only keep democracy alive is all. It's like basically, that to me is like, wow. Like he's like, yeah, hell yeah, it's expensive, but we're keeping democracy alive. Like, how can we do this? How can we hold people accountable if we don't put the money into it?
Yeah. And also, how can people be informed in the choices that they make in democracy if they don't know what the issues are, what the policies being proposed are, or who the candidates actually are? Because your government, as we know as local journalists, your government is local. I mean, there's the
Yeah.
show out of Washington, and God knows it's a show, but what actually affects your life is local.
I'm curious, Jenna, do you think, I mean, I haven't worked on a local newspaper, right? But I can associate with this. But do you think I have to say, like, I do remember and I still see the importance of how, especially newspapers in particular, keep democracy alive. Like they really do are the ones who are going in, especially the local ones. They go in and they're the ones breaking these small stories that become bigger because they get a spotlight put on it, right? Do you see that? Do you still see that? Like, do you see newspapers as being as important as they were? Do you think the public sees them as being as important as
I'm
they do
not sure if
today?
the
As they do back?
public sees them as being as important as they were. And a big part of that problem is because so many seeds of distrust have been sown and have been allowed to fester for well over a decade at this point, probably two, if I really think about it. But no, that like they're so completely essential. One of the things that always gets me every single year, and again, had I not worked in local news, and while I haven't worked for a newspaper, I work for local news in terms of like, radio or television. Um, had I not had those jobs, there's a lot about local politics and local government I would not know because it's
Hmm.
not, otherwise, how else would you get access to this information? And so when it comes time to vote, that's why you have so many people who just admittedly mindlessly vote down party lines. I don't know who this person is, but I guess they're on team A or team B, so whatever. And then you end up with, government officials who know that they don't have to be held accountable. And, you just build a little bit of name recognition for yourself at one level, and then you can just grow from there because I don't really know who this person is or what they've done, but I don't know. I've seen lawn signs for them, so I guess I'll vote. You know what I'm saying? Like it just
Yeah.
snowballs.
And I also think there's a certain, I feel like the characters, especially the character of Ned Sampson,
Oh, yeah.
I, I feel like he really represents, like, in the story and the show, he talks about, he wanted to always be a journalist, but his dad talked him out of it because he says, journalist, you're not going to make money from that. It's dying industry. So he went into sales, and that's where he became successful. And then, but deep down, Ned always wanted to be in work as a journalist and work in a newspaper. And there was a point in there, right, John? There was like this point where he talks about how as a kid, he's like, I didn't want to be Superman. I wanted to be Clark Kent. He was the real superhero. And that journalism is what? Journalism is his
There is
kryptonite.
my kryptonite, which I think so. I think that that's true for a lot of people who genuinely feel called to do this kind of work. Is that, yeah, journalism is my kryptonite. I probably have a much more stable and comfortable life
Yes.
if I wasn't drawn to this nonsense.
And that's the thing that I get from this show is the community aspect. You know what I mean? And the community, the
Oh,
people who all
totally.
want to be there, they all want the people who want to be there. Well, it's interesting. Again, these are all volunteers. That was the thing. Like,
Well, that's the other thing that I will say that for some of the journalism groups that I'm engaged with online, that a lot of journalists really reacted to, maybe more than anything, the headlines seem to be for a lot of people is these journalists are volunteers.
right.
And I mean, listen, we've talked about, like salary issues and things of that nature when it comes to getting into this business and the fact that as it gets stretched further and further, that's going to get cut further and further back. But to expect somebody, this isn't a 9 to 5 job. I think
No.
we've talked about that so many different ways and so many different times. And so to expect somebody to do this job to the best of their ability, which means bringing the public the kind of honest and well thought out, well written, cared for content that's been fact checked,
Mhm.
that, like, yeah, that costs money. You cannot, the more you push people, like, not the more you push people, the lower those salaries get, the more journalists are going to have to juggle like doing this and doing something else and doing this and doing something else. And yeah, in a capitalist society, that leaves room for all kinds of corruption.
But I remember when you sent me that quote of the people who were they were upset that the show's like, oh great, now journalism are right?
Yeah.
They're volunteers. But here's where I get, I mean, you correct me, like here's where I have pushback with that. This is not saying this is the new business model. It is saying, sadly, this is kind of where we are at. And
Yes.
maybe not to this extreme, but and even when you look at like the show trailer that we played kind of sets us up in the sense of like Ned, who just got this job as new editor in chief of this newspaper, is now, he doesn't have a budget. He doesn't have a budget to really hire news people. So Marv Putnam, who's the CEO of the company who owns this paper, is like, this is what you got. But at the same point, when Ned asks Marv, like, can I ask for people who already work for the company? Can I ask if they can volunteer their time to do the paper? And Marv's like, okay, let's start there. Because Marv wants to save the paper. He sees something of value in it.
He does. I will say that having worked in the industry now, that's not an agreement that you make without a contractual guarantee that once we prove ourselves, people start making money. Because I've seen too many people in
True.
leadership who are just like, oh, we're getting this for free. I'm not changing that for
I,
anything. That's just my trauma
no,
talking.
it's
And
no.
that is real trauma.
No, I agree. I agree. Listen, this is what happens whenever you're talking about somebody who's a CEO of a company, because Mario says this in a couple places. This is a business. If you
Yeah.
don't make money, we're going to shut it down. But I also want to stress too, it's a comedy series, people. We got to like also take a little step back. This is not, it's not,
I
it's
get it,
setting
but
up.
so many journalists are feeling so dejected and traumatized and like I get the reaction as well. I hear what you're saying, Dom, and I totally agree and understand, but I also get why there's that just like, and these people are volunteers. That's it. And like I get where that's coming from as well.
I just get more frustrated when I see things like the newsroom and the morning show, or even Murphy Brown, in the sense of talking about journalism, because I think what they do is set up a more glamorous aspect, the drama, the all these like kind of side story, the just the kind of it's very just it doesn't always feel as real. Aspects of the jobs are real, but the reality is most of the things wouldn't happen. And I think it sets this false sense of what journalism is and what it ends up being, which is a lot of gritty, not really sometimes not the most exciting stuff, but you have to find
Not
the work.
sexy stuff. There's no
Exactly.
glam squad. There's no, yeah, no,
No,
it's
no. So I think this show has a sense of it's not trying to be that. I think people have to also kind of go along again with it represents an aspect of time that I think is really interesting because if anything, look at the people who end up being super successful at their jobs there. It's Ned and also Mare, who starts off, we meet her in the show as a compositor. She was a journalist in the military. She was a military person. She worked for the military newspaper, and she's a compositor just dropping AP articles in the newspaper because they didn't have a budget. They just had a wire service, I should say. Shouldn't say AP. They had a wire service and they were just dropping
I
articles.
I feel like there's a couple of places in the show though where they say something like we just have a wire service and if
Yes.
you know exactly
Yeah,
what they're talking
exactly. I
about.
know. I
So
know.
I say you're safe to say.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. But it's like, but it's like funny to me because it's like here you have this person, she ends up accelerating. Why? Because she's able to actually do the work that she was trained to do. The other people, the other volunteers are really kind of figuring it out as they go along, which is where the comedy comes in. Um, Especially when you're talking about the comedy of newsroom life, which I think a lot of people, um, you know, there we were talking about this. Like, I love a show that kind of tries to, where it's fun watching something try to depict a world in which we all work. And now, yes, we didn't work in newspapers, but newsrooms are newsrooms, and
Yeah.
they carry a lot of the same truths to them. And that's the fact that, you have reporters like a story they have. It falls apart and they have to find a replacement or you need a lead story and it is it's like what's our lead for today, we don't have anything. And then there's also other things that people might not know about. There's office gossip. There's the fact that there's the life of the people who work there, the community you form. So I guess it sort of brings apart this whole thing, like you know when you're covering like these really tough stories and working under deadlines. I find it interesting of how you balance that all with like we as reporters, what we do when you have you're working on these tight deadlines. What's it like then when you need to have some fun? I think people don't realize like we used to have a lot of fun when we worked together at Metro Focus, like the two of us, and we had tight deadlines, right?
Mm-hmm. But we had a
Um,
daily show to put out, which
but you
is
had to
kind
deal.
of, I mean, it's not quite exactly like a daily newspaper because, again, different mediums, but, like deadlines are deadlines.
And I think like, what you saw in the show, what you see in the show throughout the series is the bonding of the characters. Again, it's a comedy, but they do have, the office chat or the after work hangouts. I love watching also even about the reality of how, listen, when you're a reporter working day to day and you have to go, you don't know if you're going to be in the field, in the office, how do you dress even? I think there was
Oh
a
my
funny,
God. Do you remember my locker at the show?
oh my God.
Yeah, I had like, so I kept a little locker with like, a blazer and I think a skirt and like a smart shirt or something. So in case like, Jenna, we need you to go out in the field or tape this or go in the studio and tape that, I had something like I had a little cache of makeup ready to go because I was frequently my own makeup artist. But yeah, otherwise, like before I got to um Metro Focus, our last show, prior to that, when I was working out of Albany, I mean, smaller markets command even smaller salaries, kind of like Toledo.
Hmm?
And it was There was more than a few times where secondhand clothes made it on the air.
I think it was Mayer who had that quote. I dress like I shot from a box of clothes from an estate sale for an old man who died a virgin.
Well, that was actually something that I think uh oh God, what was her name? No, I shouldn't say the horrible woman, but
Esmeralda?
Esmeralda, there we go. Texted to, yes, one of the reporters in an
Oh,
attempt
she
to
said, okay.
undermine her because like, oh, you even dress so terribly. And it's like, well,
I love
yeah,
it.
look at my salary. And we even had that conversation in one of our episodes about, the
Yes.
expectations, especially for women in the workplace, um, is to show up and dress a certain way. Meanwhile, it's just like, okay, but my salary says I need to go back to Goodwill, so we need to figure out a way.
But I also go when you're working in this kind of high pressure environment, it is so important to also have fun. And I know you do because it's a distressor, right? You're
Oh,
dealing
it's
with,
a complete distressor. I mean, what was it? Like one of the big stories that we followed for a long time, was the Gilgo Beach murders, which
oh,
turned
yeah.
out to be a serial killer. That we were talking to the family members and to the police, and like one of the other things that I don't think the public really grasps is that to be able to tell those kind of stories, um, to tell them not just honestly and fairly, but like to bring out the humanity, you have to be able to have a level of emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
And when you're engaging with work like that or with a story like that, those kind of stories get on you. Like when you're talking to somebody who's got this incredibly emotionally charged story, you feel that. And if you're in the field, my God, there's been some places where I've been in the field and the whole situation is hyper emotionally charged that you pick up on those emotions. So, but again, you have to like take all of that and then compartmentalize it so that you can separate, like, okay,
Mhm.
these were my feelings, but these are the facts, and here's what the story is, blah, 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 blah. Um, Still all of that tension, it needs to go somewhere. And like, I'll be honest, yeah, I had plastic poo in the office. That's where my tension went.
I mean, I always remember with one of our coworkers, Sean, that it was Halloween and I spent way too much time. Because I used to call him, Sean was a guy who had a lot of hair, big hair, and I used to call him Chewbacca. He had also a big beard, and I would just call him Chewbacca. And I spent way too much time getting a Chewbacca mask, the one that I think that makes that noise. It does the and I also found a Chewbacca costume at Target and I came in dressed as Sean. I just remembered being kind of like, what am I doing? I am a seasoned person but it was Halloween
You were
time
in
and
leadership at that point. You were
I,
like an EP. Well,
not
you were
that
a
I was
senior
almost,
producer, but
yes,
yeah.
I was, but still, but you know what? It was Halloween and it was fun. And I think that's the part of this show too that I loved is, they showcase that aspect of needing to have fun, of needing to have that build that bonding of them. Remember, there was a thing they were one of the guys, Travis, I think he created this uh, mouse nudger. So it was a mouse that would nudge your computer so that if your
Yes.
bosses are keeping track of how long you haven't been logged into your computer, it would nudge your mouse so that it'll show that you've been active. And so all of them buy these, they all put these mouse nudgers on their, attach them to their computer so that it looks like they're all working. And yet the whole crew of them go inside an office and are playing a game. They're playing Don't Wake Daddy. And I'm like, this is hysterical. I'm like, I could see playing. Sometimes you just need to distress. Again, the day can be so tough on you, and the stories can be so tough that you do need some way to laugh.
And even if the stories aren't tough, just meeting those
Yep.
deadlines. Because in
Just
in
need, yeah.
Sean's defense, in the outside chance that he actually sees or hears this, is so Sean worked on our show as an editor, but an editor in TV is the person who's going to be splicing together the
Yes.
episode and putting in like the B-roll and all sorts of stuff. And when you have like either stuff is you're still waiting for uh what is it, elements to come in or things to get verified so that when you put like the name or
The
the,
Chiron, yep.
there we go. I always mispronounce that word. On the person who's speaking, that you have the correct information. So when you're waiting for all of that and you have a deadline, because once Sean would finish working on a segment, then those segments all get to put together. The entire show has to get bounced out, and then meaning the file has to get exported. Then it has to get quality checked. By the way, we have a deadline before, this has to go in the
Yeah.
system so it can go out on the broadcast. Like if you've got all of that happening and there's people around you who are like, I don't know, I made some calls, but I haven't heard back,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yes.
you're gonna go crazy.
You do.
Or
You
people
do.
asking you at the last minute, like, oh, wait, so all of that B-roll that we gave you, turns out we don't have the rights to use that. So pull that out and put something else in, but make sure that it flows and looks natural. Do that in 5 minutes. Like that
That's
kind of stuff would drive them crazy.
and that's the kind of stuff that drove all of us crazy because it was like you said before, there are so many deadlines. Even if the stories aren't what that maybe putting a stress on you, it is that part of the job.
Yeah.
Because somebody absorbs all that. Somebody is, it all feeds into each other. And it kind of, I think this sort of leads into how the show represents the basics of what journalists do, right? In terms of, especially when you're talking about the fundamentals of reporting. And, there's an episode where Ned is talking to a group of, well, he's actually talking to his volunteers in terms of many of them hadn't written anything before. So he's like, you know what? There's 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why. And along with talking about fact checking and also talking about quoting and the proper sourcing. So, it shows all these aspects of the job that are so important to
Well,
everyone.
it
And no
showed
matter
the
what,
basics of journalism. Like that's 101. But I would imagine that the show, in addition to, showing what life is like in a newsroom, is also low key educating the public on what it is.
exactly.
Yeah, because that part, when I saw that scene in the show, I was just like, oh, because not everybody does this. And, don't get me wrong, that sounds very like, well, obviously. But again, if you don't do it for a living, it's becoming clearer and clearer that most people have no idea what journalists do. So,
No. And it shows also how important certain parts of the job are too. Like there is a scene where Adelola, she's one of the accountants. They I laugh at this. I've watched the show twice straight through, and the scene keeps cracking me up. It's where they talk about the importance of punctuation, and it's
mm,
because her headline that she wrote was Yvette Evans, comma, pig, comma, to be evicted. It was supposed to be Yvette Evans's pig is to be evicted, yet the way it comes off sounding is Yvette Evans, Stevens, that pig is going to be evicted, and it's funny because she was like in the whole thing she's like, okay, it was one mistake, she's like, let it go. But there is an importance. I mean, we've all made mistakes. That's an important part of being a journalist too, is
well,
we do make
hopefully,
mistakes.
I mean, this is a great place for why you need editors or senior producers or somebody who goes through the piece before it goes to be published and is like, hold on,
Exactly.
wait a second. Hold on.
Exactly.
You can't publish that. That looks like this lady's a pig.
Well, I mean, for you, Jenna, have you had any experiences like that you could say where some kind of goof up that happened or something for yourself?
Let's see. I would say the biggest thing, because luckily I've always worked in places, even if there wasn't somebody who had the official job title of editor. And again, the smaller the organization
Hmm.
is, the more often you'll have like, you're an editor and a writer and a this
Hmm.
and a that, which that also leaves room for mistakes. But given the fact that most of my work has been in broadcasting, my biggest mistakes have all been in the mispronunciation zone.
Okay.
Like I didn't get a pronouncer, or the pronouncer that I got for something wasn't correctly phonetically spelled out. So I have mispronounced, unfortunately, more than a few people's names. And then what the worst part is that when you're in the studio, when you're in the recording studio, so you've got the IFP thing in your ear, and you're trying to engage in a natural feeling conversation because you're still being taped. You've got someone screaming at you, no, say it that. I'm sorry, I'm trying to speak. If you wanted it said correctly, you should have put
Yep.
it in the
Yep.
script on the, on the
But
prompter that I'm reading which nobody put a pronouncer in there, and I hit that cold. So what we got is what we got.
But it's funny being on the producing side of that too. It's oftentimes even when you write an intro for the guest, and sometimes guests have certain ways they want to be introduced, or maybe even if you have it right from the publicist who you work with, or let's say you go on and you ask them, things can change. Or sometimes you just go by what you thought. He's like, oh, they're a reporter at this location, or this person's title is this. And we put it in for you to read. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's like the guest goes, that's not that's not the title that I want. Or that's not, and that even for us on that end,
That was a thing also I found between like guests and their PR person.
oh, yes. It could always be different. You just don't know what you're getting. And I know not every guest has a PR person, but a lot of times when you're talking to even booking another reporter, sometimes you're working through a communications person who will tell you one thing, and then reporter comes on the show and they're like, no, actually, I know that's not my title, or that's not what I want to be my title, or I want to be introduced this way. So those are the things that sometimes, especially when you have a tight deadline. We didn't work in live news, but we
Thank
did live
God.
to tape.
Thank
my,
God.
one of my, I have to say, so when I started out on our show, I was started out as a booker, well, senior booker slash producer. I was doing
No,
a little bit of
slash is quite
everything.
common in small
Yes,
newsrooms. That's slash.
you do a lot of different things, but I remember sending guests to the wrong studio. So we had two studios. One was where a studio where the team worked and had our control room. The other studio was the actual recording studio where you would sit in Lincoln Center. And I remember just being kind of like, I remember one time sending guests. It happened. I hate to say this. It must have happened more than once. I don't think it just happened one time, but sending people to I sent it to our office studio, which was like a 15-20 minutes away. But when you're dealing with deadlines, again, when you're like, oh my goodness, this guy has a hard out. They've got to be out of here. They've got to be on the road in a half hour. And now I just wasted 15 minutes of them coming here. And I'm like, you got to go to Lincoln Center. It's going to take, it's like, that was stressful. But that happens sometimes when when
Yeah,
you're doing
no,
a
that
lot of
also
different
does.
jobs and you're doing, and I feel like, again, what I liked about this show was captured some of that aspect of it, of
Well,
the,
also the other side of that equation that you just put together is that we weren't just twiddling our thumbs up at Lincoln
no,
Center. Like the way the
no.
show because we would tape multiple episodes because again we were live to tape. So there were numerous times where we would tape multiple different segments all in one day. So those were stacked one on top of the other. So if you had like a window between like I don't know 11:45 and like 12:30 to tape this one person and they're at the wrong location and with midday traffic it's going to take them it threw everything off. It
Hmm.
threw everybody off, it threw everything off and then anyway, it was
But it's again, and it also showcases, I think the show is about like how much you have to actually do in terms of coming up with the concept of the story. You know what I mean? Like you're pitching your ideas, you're trying to think what works today in the news that you're doing, right? What
that
is,
morning meeting.
and that really is it's an important aspect of it. Like, all right, so what guys, everyone, what do we got going on? Like, what is it? Give me a story. Give me something that, and what I loved about here too, when you're talking about local versus national, is that you are more connected to the community, what's happening
You
in the
have to
community,
be. Yeah, you have to
and
be.
like knowing what's going on, the story that you think is little, whether it be, um, there's a scene where the character Mare, the reporter, her building loses its water because of the fact that there was a clog in the sewer system. It was
In New
back
York,
something.
we called them fatbergs.
Oh, is that what we do? I don't know
No,
that.
because I remember there was a whole fatberg story, and then the Department of Sanitation had to be like, please do not flush the following down the toilet. You're clogging up the entire sewer system. I personally think they pulled that story from that local New York City story.
Because in her story, they end up finding out that part of the reason why it was clogged, that she had this big sewer clog, was because of the fact that they were due to these man myths that the company that produces the paper, the Toledo truth teller, also produces these man bits, which are for men to wipe their butts. It was a way to keep your hand clean. I know it's like, but I loved it because
Flushable wipes have been a problem though, because that was
they
never
have
a thing. That's not a thing.
they do say flushable, like septic tank safe or whatever.
You
It's
can
like
say whatever you want. I
yes,
advertising and actual reality are not the same thing.
but it brings up that funny aspect, like I said, of she turned that story, she turned what happened to her personally into a story for the
Yeah.
paper and investigated it. So again, it's like when you're in a newsroom, especially in a local one, you really are trying to see what's happening in the community that you're in and how you can actually um, move forward. How do you put the story together and how do you get it right? Um, and which kind of then it's interesting because you talk about that story, it kind of leads into our next subject of ethics
Hmm.
in news. Because again, with Mayor, that story, she was actually it again because of this whole sewer system issue was started because of products that the company she worked for makes. And I think that to me, then it becomes a thing like, there was a whole discussion in the show, well, like, are we going to report this story because of the fact that we're kind of reporting on our own company? How do you do that? And I think that brings up a whole discussion of like, what are the ethics? Like, you have to trust the news that's coming. Like, you have to be able to report, even if it's your own company, you have to be willing to be, you know, looked at and
That is a
analyzed.
delicate line. I have seen some media outlets be brave in doing that and saying honestly, this is what, like a lot of times the way it'll get addressed is that so this is our parent company or this is the larger organization. Our newsroom is separate from that, but we are going to give the honest story about what took place within or with the parent company or within the organization that is become a story. An irresponsible one will bury the story, and unfortunately that does happen as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think within this show, there is this great line that Ned has where he talks about the courage in journalism uh, is sticking up for the unpopular, not the popular. I think it's knowing that you're holding people accountable. Like, it's easy sometimes, of course, to go with the popular side of the news, right?
Is that really a popular thing though? Because to be perfectly honest, in this particular day and age, and don't get me wrong, I agree with what Ned said, but I think that line should have been the courage in journalism is sticking up for the unsafe, not the safe. Because a lot of what keeps people quiet
Hmm.
is the fact that they feel incredibly unsafe to tell the truth.
Interesting. I think he might have been doing popular and popular because I think if I'm right, he was talking to the high school students. So I think he might have been trying to relate it to how maybe some of
Yeah,
them
no, I
see
get what that
life.
scene is. I'm just saying, in general, in my experience as
Sure.
a journalist, it's not about the popular, it's about what's safe and what's not safe. And that's why you have, investigative journalists who have like these signal chats that they'll let people reach out to them on, or you have, the way they handle unnamed sources, etc. Like, no, honestly, telling the truth is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, especially when people have an interest in keeping you quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think it's true whether or not it's as big. I think sometimes we think of stories like that, everything seems to be like this huge story, but then sometimes it's even the smaller ones that are we're dealing with. Like there's a story within the show where Esmeralda is investigating the so the park one of the parks shut down one of the only restroom in the park in exchange for a bicycle rack. And so she's going on this to kind of investigate why they did that. And she really didn't want to cover the story. So she's kind of like really like whatever. But she kind of gets caught up in figuring out she's like this one of these I think like one of these project managers is who the city project manager is the person behind it. And so she decides she wants to investigate this project manager. She says, we're going to find out the truth. That man is who is at the source of this. So she goes to his office with her coworker Mayor, and she sneaks into his office. And I think it's fascinating because it really showed this whole way of like her like the ethics again of where do journal like how far do you go in order to find the truth? You know what I mean? And that wasn't the biggest necessarily story, but she actually made it a legitimate story because there was corruption going on.
Well,
Maybe it
anytime
wasn't
anyone's got anything to hide, usually that's
there's
because we're
something.
doing dirt.
And I love that aspect of again of showing how that works. Um, I mean, for you, Jenna, like even when we're talking about what's it like in terms of ethics, like was there ever a story where you felt like you were either stonewalled while you were trying to find something out, or let's say ethically you felt like you were in a situation, or was there an ethical situation for you that made you feel like okay, like you had to catch yourself? Like I know for me, it's always been like making sure when you have guests on. It was never that we were doing, a lot of times, like I worked as a producer, you're booking guests and you're putting these stories on there. But sometimes people have like motives in terms of they're promoting something,
Oh, there
right?
were
Like,
several times where that happened. There was several times where I raised complaints that I'm not doing infomercials. And sometimes in when you have, say, a news magazine format, that can end up happening where it's like, but it's this new thing and we're informing the public. I'm like, no, we're not. We're doing a commercial for somebody. This is not a story.
and it can be tricky sometimes, like you said, but remember, even in the show,
I
Esmeralda,
was
when
very
we,
clear on it. I'm just like, sometimes these are not stories. These are infomercials.
but it's funny because Esmeralda in the show, who when you meet her, she's kind of managing the online version for the show, for the newspaper, the
Yeah.
Toledo Truth Teller, and she um, does a lot of clickbaity stories. And that to me is like a real clear indication of like even within news, but even within like, mainstream outlets, like people do these kind of clickbaity stories where it's like I think one of the headlines was how much did Ben Affleck, tip his limo driver? And you had to go one of those things where you had to keep scrolling down the things, just scroll and scroll and scroll. And it's
That's one
like,
of those things that I mean, okay. Even though the website that I'm thinking of no longer exists, but in the
okay.
name of litigiousness, I'm not going to name them, but there were some online news outlets that were hella guilty of that, or would publish a piece online, but they would publish it in sections. So you had to keep clicking through page after page after page. And I mean, listen, I'm sure at this point most people understand that what that does on the back end is that the website registers like each click is like not a new view, but like you're able to pull viewers through this entire thing. If it's just an article, you should be able to just read the article. But once we got into the digital age, you end up with all of these like clever little tips and tricks to
Yeah.
like, get the algorithm to boost your whatever. And we all work for the algorithm at this point.
Yeah. And that shows how the industry has shifted, which I think the show
Yeah.
also touches on. Because don't forget, there was when we're introduced to the character of Wesley, who runs the website So Wesley, which is basically this. So Wesley is run by a high school student
Yeah.
who he has 300,000 followers. He's a blog, and he is pretty much doing what he's like a news influencer of sorts because he's taking stories that he sees on other local outlets and he's repurposing them and putting it on his. So he's doing this all on his own. And I remember where one of the high school students asks Ned in a Q&A, she's interviewing him for her school paper and she says like, what's your budget like? And he's like $500,000. She's like, wow, you guys, that's a lot of money. She's like, so Wesley has more followers than you have. That blog has more followers than you have. And he does it on his own. And he's a high school student. And it kind of we've discussed this too, right? It kind of shows this way of like how sometimes being somebody who just reads news and isn't really reporting on it is very different than
I
actual
was
doing
gonna
the
say,
reporting.
yeah, that's not like what I mean. Listen, God bless Wesley for his huge
Yes.
budget and
Yeah.
his gazillion
No,
followers,
yes.
but yeah, no, like that's not. He's relying on the much lower paid, much lesser read. Actually, that's one of the big things. This is like such a bone that I have to pick.
Yeah.
Um, is that you're relying on the fact that most people aren't reading local news, they aren't engaging with it. Therefore, you can then read that or repurpose that, and then of course add your hot take to it. And for all of your followers, because you're giving your personal take to everything, which creates the false sense of we have a relationship with one another, because I feel like I know you because you're telling me what you think, which I
Hmm.
don't necessarily get from journalists. They just tell me stuff and I don't even know where to
Hmm.
find. Anyway, it just they people like Wesley would not be able to amass the followings and the amount of the budgets that they do if you didn't have some lowly
Hmm.
unpaid journalist doing the actual work that he is now capitalizing on. But because
And
again, we all work for the algorithm, oh, but he has so many followers.
yes, it doesn't mean that person is telling you is any more legitimate. I think we live in a society where you do see a number of followers and you give more credence to them. Like, wow, they must be telling the truth. They must know what they're doing. They must have the experience. Because why else would they have all those people following them? Um, and also, within the show, there is sort of this discussion when Ned first starts at the paper. One of his things the first things he does, what we talked about earlier, like cutting the wire service. Like, listen, we worked for a local news outlet. Yes, it's based in New York, but we were local news for our public TV station, and we didn't have wires. Not that you know what I mean? Like, and it's different. But Ned, the reason why he did that was because he wanted to focus on the actual journalism of the local community. And I think that's also another really big aspect of like, when we're talking about the shifts of the industry, we're seeing a shift away from local, right? A shift away from telling those stories that we end up missing sometimes because of the fact that we
We end
don't
up
have.
missing quite frequently.
Yes. And we've discussed this before too in the show when we talked about, some people don't want you to hear that news. Some people they don't want like certain state assemblies, or they don't want certain people reporting on everything that's going on within the government for certain reasons. So, there's a reason for all that. So I love the fact that I think that's a big part of the importance of, especially about like local journalism, is producing original content. It is time consuming, but it is also expensive. And I get that.
Yeah, and that's usually what is the kiss of death, is that
Yes.
it's not only time consuming, but more importantly, it is expensive. And as again, you have more people buying up local media outlets who are just just looking to turn a profit or earn a buck. Journalism is not that place to do that. But if you look at it, as we heard from the very beginning of the show, we only save democracy. If you understand it that way, then this is a worthwhile investment. But it's like, when people got so upset at the Washington Post over some editorial decisions that were
Hmm.
made at the behest of owner Jeff Bezos, and people were saying, I'm going to cut my subscription and show them. And people were saying, you're not hurting him. You're only hurting the journalists who work there. This is the Washington Post is not how Jeff Bezos makes his money. Literally, he's probably losing money on that paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So uh, so in the end, I do think like it's the investment in local. Again, when I think about where we see with the paper, when we're introduced them from the 1970s, it's this company that had 900 people working for it. And it was expensive, but it came at a cost, right? And now you have 7 people, mostly volunteers, who have not worked in journalism, trying to save this paper, trying to save this one outlet in Toledo, Ohio, that is, they want to help the community. They're going with this, of course, real, I think, really kind of beautiful idea of like, we want to do some good in our community. We want to be able to mean something and make a difference, which I don't always think gets recognized. And sometimes, here's the thing too, like, you sometimes as reporters or as people who work or as journalists, you put all this work into something, and either sometimes it doesn't get the recognition it should, or sometimes it gets recognition, but it's a lot of negativity, or you could deal with critics and kind of like commentators online who start posting things about, what you.
Sometimes though, like even the critics or, I mean, first of all, everybody wants to be a critic now. That's one of
Yes.
the beautiful things that
But
the comments section has brought us all.
Jenna, this is the funny part. newspapers don't want to hire critics, but at the same point, everybody wants to be a critic. Like everybody thinks they have the access to be a critic too.
Well, at the same time, I would say though that the critics that at least for a long time newspapers did hire for arts or culture or food were rooted in something, not just like a knee-jerk emotional reaction of I don't like that or like you know what I'm saying? Like it
Yeah.
wasn't like the comment section is not where you go for intellectual discourse. It's
No.
usually a bunch of emotional reactions and people emotionally reacting to someone else's emotional reaction.
There was a couple of points in the show where they dealt with both people, I guess people online who were critical of the reports that they actually put out on the Toledo paper, and there was the fact that Mayor exposed one of the high school teachers of something, and she said like it was a beloved, teacher, and she was like, you know what? She was proud of herself. She's like, people are pissed at me, but you know what? I did the right thing, and she was proud of that. And then also, there was a troll who was commenting constantly on all the articles, and so everybody on the staff decided they were going to track down that troll. And that's what they ended up doing is like, which I would find fascinating, just to like want to track down a troll who's been commenting on everything that you've been putting out there. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? I read it, what I mean? Like, you just want, I thought that was because they're looking at it as we're trying our best. We're trying our best to do the right thing here. Yes, you're pulling apart the fact that maybe we didn't put a comma or here, or maybe the fact that we made a, but
Well, in
we're
all
trying our
fairness, if
best.
I was the lady that they called a pig, I'd be like,
Oh, well, that one,
speaking of a comma, I'm just saying, speaking of a
that
comma.
is, that might make a difference, actually.
But no, there's a meme, Dom, and I don't know if you've seen it. It's I wonder if somebody actually made this. It looks like a like, one of those cross stitch things that your grandmother used to make or whatever.
Okay.
And within the circle, I can't remember, I think it's called cross stitch. Anyway, it says that, journalism, it's a tough job with insane pressure and pretty crappy pay. On the other hand, everybody hates you. Like which to me, just perfectly encapsulates the not only the situation, but just the fact that everybody loves to criticize the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
I can't say that I've had that many like online trolls. Like occasionally stuff would bubble up to my consciousness, and when I say that, I mean because we did have on both of the shows that I worked on people who were for the most part monitoring the
Mhm.
social media pages, etc. So I didn't necessarily see everything, even though I would get occasionally like bits and pieces that actually we're starting to get some kind of racist comments about this black girl on the camera. But ones that did make it to my attention, and this was very, very big, was when I was working on Metro Focus. Sometimes people would have a problem with the way that I pronounced the name of what Gen Z lovingly calls Work Island. Now, of
Mhm.
course, I wasn't saying Work Island on the air. I was saying the name of what Work Island is
Say it.
and
Say it, Jenna.
Manhattan. But then I would get these comments just like, there's two T's in Manhattan. I'm like, nobody knows where Manhattan is. That's nobody, just stop. But you know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I mean. Like, sometimes critics just love to criticize,
Yes.
just they love to just, it's almost as like you get a rush from being
Yes.
able to point out a flaw in something.
Yes. And there's also a difference between being a critic, right, and a troll, because there are those
Oh, yeah.
differences of just wanting to troll people and just say negative shit just because that's just what you want to do versus somebody who's, offering maybe up, hey, there was another side of the story, or maybe, and sometimes that does happen. Sometimes we're like, hey, we found this guest from that, or we found a different aspect of the story through the comment section. So it does mean listening to your audience. Like you have to listen to your audience, but within constructively, I think, as opposed to toxic behavior. But on the flip side of Jenna, of the whole criticism and trolls, there's also the other side of it, right? Which is like the awards and the recognition that in the show that they show as the newspapers moved along. It goes from
Yeah.
being still, listen, it still wasn't perfect, but they've certainly built it from just being a paper about clickbait and just putting about just generic info on to actually reporting on what's happening in their community. And we're not going to say who won the thing, but they do get nominated for Ohio Journalism Awards. And I think it's so interesting because like I do ask, like, it's such a big deal for them. Like, how much do you think recognition awards really matter in this business? In the end, like, how much does it matter, do you think, to journalists? How much does it matter to you when you get certain recognition or being nominated for an award or winning an award?
I would imagine it matters a lot. I mean, not imagine, I know. You're the one with the Emmy. I don't have one.
Oh, whatever.
I've heard people say that, like, oh, awards don't really matter and nobody cares about that. And I would say BS. Of course, you want to be acknowledged by your peers for doing excellent work. Like, it's nice to hear it, but yeah, it's nice to be like formally awarded for it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, no, of course it matters. And of course you want to win, etc. Like, I know that there are, how can I put this? I've never quite been able to figure out how best to hack the regional Emmys, because I've always found that and by the way, when you work in local news, there's like the national Emmys. First of all, the one that's on TV is more for drama and stuff like that, like script
Talk
narratives.
shows.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
etc.
yes.
Whereas, for the local stuff, that tends to be where you find your news stations
Right.
at the regional Emmys. And yeah, I've never, well, first of all, you don't find out what the categories are until they're announced. And then, like, every year, it would always seem just like, how have I done? I've like put my foot in this work and nothing fits into any of these categories.
It was always that was always tricky, right? Because you never really understood, I think, how it wasn't. Yeah, I think some stations knew exactly. I don't want to even say they designed it around that, but they did enough content that
I'm
they
sure
could.
there were other stations that did a much better
But I think
job.
well, at figuring that little aspect out. But I think for us, yeah, it was sometimes tough because, you know, you are doing, like, I know. So for the Emmy that I have behind me, oh, is that behind me? I'm so
Oh, I
sorry.
know. Oh, yes. Is that my Emmy?
Is that my Emmy? Um, it's a New York Emmy Award, and so it is regional, and it was really for a story that was seen, and we just decided to do a tape piece on it about a publicist who, was telling her personal story of struggle. And, I worked with Steve Thompson, who was Steve does everything. Now he's a senior producer. He goes in the field, he edits, he does everything. And so I had worked with him in terms of finding that story and fleshing that out, and he was filming it, and then we went over things. So it's like that was that's the thing too. Emmys are a lot of times they really are, you're talking about teamwork, right? You're talking about
Hmm.
working as a team in terms of bringing those stories there. It isn't just one person it's not like just one person does everything. Oftentimes, I shouldn't say it, maybe sometimes it depends on the units, but a lot of times it's a lot of people who pushes it out, how it gets attention, who's putting it
Yeah.
up. So I think, I have to say, like, we didn't think we were winning anything. We were just that so when you win, you oftentimes you go to the dinner, and there's
Never
like,
got invited to the dinner. Not that I'm feeling any type of way about
sorry.
that either.
But we were nominated, and we were there with our EP, Dave Brown. And, it was so funny, Jenna, because it was other people from the station who were there too. They all were nominated for stuff. And I remember we were there. I think we had one nomination that year, and I did not have any, and I didn't think we were winning, and neither did Steve. And I will be telling the truth that I was probably under the influence of something.
Oh no, you go to
Of
those
some,
dinners and you get
I,
sauced, man. Like,
I'm
I've been
like,
to other industry events, and yes, as long as
I
there's an
was,
open bar, that's
I was just like, we were just
unfortunately
having
getting into
fun.
the sauce is another unfortunate coping mechanism side effect of this job.
We had a blast and had no idea we were going to win. All of a sudden, we won. We heard our names around. We were like, "Is that us?" And it was like we ran up there, and it was. I had no, and yet you're right. Like, I think I'd be lying if I said, like, it doesn't mean something. It does.
Of
It's a
course it
nice thing to have.
does.
But I didn't go into it thinking I never went into anything saying I'm looking to do this to win an award. I for me, it always came, and I think a lot of us, we go into it, right, where we wanted to do the best product possible. And there were segments and there were field pieces that we did that honestly I was so proud of and didn't win anything for it, didn't even get nominated. So
No,
just winning doesn't necessarily mean that was the best. It just means it's probably maybe what lucked out that year. Um,
that's a
and I
hard
think
pill to swallow, man, because sometimes
it
you
is.
do put like, just so much hopefully you're in a place where you can put a lot of love and care into every piece that you do, but chances are, let's be real here, there's going to be a few stories throughout say a year that you really get to like massage and care for and really just put together the
Mhm.
best, most succinct narrative that is informative and educational and engaging for an audience. And yeah, it doesn't fit into any of the Emmy categories. So
Yeah, you don't. And kind of makes me think of something that I want to get into, which is now part of the show. They do touch on this whole thing of road trips, like people working on these stories and going on these road trips, right? And or working together
well, that's quite
on field
normal in news.
reporting.
I mean, yeah, like again, because our last show we were a in the studio news magazine. So that was there really weren't that many opportunities for that, but in every other yeah, you get out there and get me my news means you got to get in transportation and go.
But so in the show, they show a couple of moments of Ned and Mayor going on. They go in this field shoot to investigate a possible cult, which is really funny. But I love watching, Ned getting in the car. Mayor's driving. It's her car. He gets in the car and it's messy. There's stuff all over the place. And she's just like, just move it, whatever. And he's just like grossed out by the whole thing. He's just like, ugh. And then, they're talking about the questions. She's like asking him, do you want to look over the questions? Like, no, don't worry. I trust you, and it made me, for me, it was a flashback to you and I. Now, there was a story that you had pitched about Akwesasne. And if you want to give a little bit of context, I do want to just say, like, when you work for, again, we were a news magazine. So our boss, like, we wanted to cover this story that you had pitched, and it was like we wanted to cover, but is it in the budget? And our boss Dave at the time was like, went to our other people, was like, hey, we really want to do this story, and you have to get it approved first.
Yeah, you
And
have to
that
get
in
the
of itself
budget
is a
approved.
mission of
Yeah.
there's a whole process to that. It isn't always easy, even when it's a great story.
Well, it's
But
like the double pitch because you have to pitch the story to your editor or senior producer and get them to be like, yeah, that is the story. And then if that story to cover it requires a budget that goes outside of maybe what's already been budgeted or is going to deviate from the way that funds are usually allocated, then there's the second pitch that has to go to management to be like, so we can tell a story that nobody else has told before,
yeah,
which is what I did. But it's going to require us to travel. But nobody else has this. And this
yeah,
is a story that wouldn't just be national. We can actually, it can go, excuse me, not national. This is a story that wouldn't just be local. We can actually take this piece national, which is also what I did. And so it's worth it for us to do that. And, sometimes people in leadership can be like, meh, which is kind of, where we were.
and give a
And then
little
sometimes you
background.
have places that are just like, go rogue and do the story. It's worth it anyway.
And do you want to give a little background on what that story was, Akwesasne, just like a
Oh, sure.
general,
Yeah.
like,
So, Akwesasne, for anybody who doesn't know, they're the Mohawk Nation of indigenous people who were here first. It actually encompasses what is like the tippy top of upstate New York and
mhm,
crosses over the
Canada.
Canada, the European drawn line between
Yeah.
anyway, that border doesn't exist for them. So we drove the length of New York State and all the way up there. And the reason why we were up there is because they have a language immersion school. And what makes that so unique is that so many of the indigenous languages to this nation, to Turtle Island, if you will, have been all but eradicated. And, we learned all about the history of the, indigenous boarding schools where children were forcibly taken out of their community and cut off from their language and their culture, etc. And so the fact that you have this community that, after all of that, has still come together and said, no, we are going to save
Hmm.
our culture and our language, etc. And we're going to do it by having a language immersion school, kind of like, the way that you might send your kid to a school where they can not only speak English, but also some other perhaps European language, or maybe even like, Asian language or something, which is a beautiful thing.
Hmm.
But these languages deserve to be
Hmm.
preserved
Hmm.
and engaged with as well. And so
Hmm.
it was fascinating to be up there. It was so much fun. The kids that we met were, I think, the most boisterous group of second graders I've ever met.
Oh,
But
they're amazing.
they were great. But yeah, it was this fascinating story, and we were able to share it with the national news feed, and that was also a point of pride for me. But
Hmm.
yeah, didn't.
But that to me is like that took like 2 days of traveling back and forth. Like it wasn't something, Steve and I were coming from, Brooklyn and that. So you're talking about a story that I forgot how many hours it took us to get there because we picked you up along the way. And it was
Yeah.
just like, again, that's not a story that you're just, going downtown because those are separate. Like when you're doing field pieces that happen with locally, but that was a big deal for us. And I loved that story because also there was such a positive message within that story. And we don't listen in news. You don't always have that, it isn't always that. A lot of
It's
times it's always
usually
this.
the point. So one of the things that I always learned from journalism is that you're looking for a point of tension. There's some sort of fission that's taken place, and so what are the either sides of the fission, and what is it that caused that tension, that break?
Yeah.
That's what you're looking for. And so that's why those stories tend to rarely ever have that, just like, here's the positive thing. Now, of course, a lot of newscasts, you'll see them usually in the D segment or the
Yes.
end, where they'll put that positive story where it's more about, here's how someone is helping. Conversation we had very early on in the podcast, solutions journalism,
Mm-hmm.
which people actually respond to in a positive way. Don't just tell me the
Mm-hmm.
world's on fire. I know.
Mm-hmm.
Show me
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's like, I got an idea. We
Yeah.
could fix it. Like, people
Yeah.
want to hear that.
So that was a great but again, that was a great experience. But also there are other experiences of just doing field reporting where you go locally and you're right. We talked about like just being able to go in the field and kind of run and trying to like you got to get comments or you got to get somebody on video. I know there were a period of time where we were doing field pieces like to cover day of air news. Um,
Oh.
yeah, you loved it. So.
Well, okay, so and we still amongst the many episodes that we're still putting together, one of them is how to talk strangers, because I don't know a single journalist who will not tell you that man on the street interviews is not the bane of their existence. It's uniquely challenging, incredibly frustrating, and when you have a deadline, sometimes you got to take what you get. And that's not always the most insightful thoughts on a subject. But
Yes,
you've got an editor who's back in the newsroom screaming, like, you better come back with something. So here's something. It's not
yes,
like,
yes.
God.
I agree. I just think like the deadline aspect of all of this is what I find to be so again, it's like you're running on a story. Remember, we'd run out on a story, you'd go in the field and it was like 10 a.m. and we'd have to be back by maybe 1 because we had to like be able to like have it,
We also, I should clarify, we did not have a news van. Like
no,
a lot,
no,
sometimes other, especially broadcast outlets, like even the
we did
station that I
not.
work for out of Albany, there was a dedicated
No, we did not.
automobile for news. We did not have that. So we
No.
are now at the mercy of New York City taxi cabs.
We weren't that far from the paper, Jenna. I'm just saying we were not that far from the
I
paper.
know.
We might not have had volunteers, but we were not in the sense of like we would either you use public transportation or if somebody had a car, you jump in it. But that really was what you did, and you're like, okay, let's get or a taxi or Uber. Um, that was how we got around. And again, there is a stress factor when you have to make that deadline of, oh, this has to air tonight at 6 o'clock, and we need to have the show locked and put in by 3. And there were many a times that did not happen. And again, and that even happens whether it's being in the field and covering breaking news, or even during, um, again, or doing field piece, or going on the road trips. It's just an aspect of life I don't think people see, because again, they think of the glamorous aspect, or the more glamorous that we see on
No,
some of
there
these
was
other shows.
nothing glamorous. I mean, it
No.
was like I think I have this great photograph that Steve must have taken because Steve was one of the cameramen who we frequently worked with. And we're somewhere outside and I'm checking my phone. I think I've got like my shoes in my hand because I'm sorry, I'm not wearing heels unless I'm on camera. And you were doing something, and it just looks like such a chic photo of like journalists working in the field. And like, no, dude, it's not chic. We might have been like in the vestibule of a building, like waiting for the, freight elevator so we could get all the crap upstairs, like the camera and the lights and the tripods and all of this stuff. Like you know, it's it's not glamorous.
It isn't, and also there's an emotional cost to doing all of this, right? There's an emotional cost of journalism, of doing all of these types of stories, of kind of being out in the field all the time, and the deadlines. Like, it does have a cost in terms of on our personal lives. And I know people will sometimes say, "Well, you chose it." It's like, yeah, we all choose lots of jobs, and they all come with certain stresses. We're not
Yeah.
bitching and moaning about that, but it also is a reality when we talk about it. It's because people don't think about it, because I think they just think like with news, you can just sign off and you're done for the night. Like, you check out at 5 o'clock, you're like, I'm done. That's not this field. That is not this field. News changes or something happens, you have to drop it. Whether it's the fact that something broke and now you change your story, or whether you have to cover a story that you weren't thinking of covering and now you have to sort of put it all together. It comes with a certain stress factor and yeah, there's an emotional cost on all of
Well, yeah,
us
I
too
mean,
as
consider the
journalists.
fact that, more and more, at least we can definitely say over the last 5 years, but I'd say it's been going on for longer, where a lot of people would, just, I feel so overwhelmed by all of the information that I'm getting about the world that we live in and, the government and what's wrong and all this other stuff. And I'm just checking out.
Yeah.
And, listen, in some ways I understand and to a degree can respect people's desire to do that. But yeah, if you're working as a journalist, that's just not an option. You can't check out. You are fully engaged, and that alone can be emotionally taxing. Knowing, and
Uh,
then there's also the added weight, I would say, of having a deeper understanding sometimes of issues or situations or something, whereas other people are not as informed, or they're relying on maybe like just rumors or gossip or something like that that isn't based in any kind of evidence or fact.
mhm, mhm.
And how do you engage with somebody in a conversation where they are literally repeating, I guess misinformation is now a word that we're using now. But yeah, they're repeating misinformation, and you don't want to, like, if this is a friend or somebody like that, you don't want to argue with them and like, beat them down and like that's absolutely incorrect and you're wrong and here's why. But at the same time, sweetie, that's absolutely incorrect. You're wrong and here's why. Like, it's a weird line to walk. And sometimes for me, that can be where more of the stress is just like talking to people who I know, and they'll say something is absolutely incorrect. Like, there were times where, like, no, dude, I was at the press conference. That's not what happened.
Mhm.
But because um of the parasocial relationship, I guess, between the influencer and the audience, somebody might say, well, I trust this person more and they said it
Yes,
was this. And I'm like, I can play it back for you. I have it on tape. That's not what was said.
it's true. There was something recently, and I want to go on the record. I am not here out to defend Ryan Reynolds, but there was something that I saw popping up that he was at. I think it was the Toronto Film Festival, and people were saying online, they were posting these stories that Ryan Reynolds, snaps at this kid reporter, and I was like, really? Ryan Reynolds? And when you read the quote, or when people were talking about it, it sounded so much worse. It's like, all right, come on, you got to hurry up. And then when I watched, I said, I want to see the clip itself. I watched the clip. I'm like, he was joking around with the kid. People can manipulate things and you know what? I'm
Well,
sure there'll be
that goes
somebody.
back to the whole headline clickbait nonsense.
Yes. And which Esmeralda is so expert at, in the
Yeah.
show, she's so expert at everything is clickbait. And that is what, yeah, I remember her saying, like, she was dealing with the digital. She's like, but people at least read it if it's clickbait, but it does harm your
People click
reputation.
on it. They clearly do not read clickbait.
But it's like it sets the wrong type of relationship that you want with the consumers. But I do think for me, when I watched this, Jenna, when I saw this with Ryan Reynolds, I'm like, okay, I don't really care about Ryan Reynolds, but I do like seeing because I don't want to just trust people, especially when they just give you like a certain clip. They just show you exactly what they want to show you. And it's like, no, I want to see the source. Let me watch
Well,
the
yeah,
full scene play out.
that's the little clip is like maybe the headline or the preview, but the story is the context.
Exactly. So I'm like,
But if
y'all are
you've got
just
an audience who's emotionally reacting to the headline or the preview clip without engaging with the context, well, now we've got a problem.
exactly because they know the people without that content, whether they're influencers or whether it's just people, commentators, they're doing it because they know that's what's going to get the clicks, right? They know that's what's going to emotionally resonate with their audience. I'm pissed off. I don't like this person. How could they snap at a child? Because he did it. It's like people chill out. And I think the big lesson is to always sort of for people to really do their own source checking. I know that was part of our world, but I don't know. To me, I always liked, even as a kid, I always liked checking sources and looking at just trying to get confirmation from multiple sources. But
Well, yes, so one of the things that I will say, two things. One is that I frequently tell people, whenever I hear the phrase of just like, oh, well, the media won't cover this, or like, I saw this in this one place, but in this, I don't know, one media outlet, but they won't cover this or they won't something else. And I'm trying to think of like a perfect example. I can't right now off the top of my head, but basically, that's not how any of this works. If something really is a big story, you're going to see it in multiple news outlets. And if you aren't seeing it in multiple news outlets, that's one of two things. Either one, that's not what you read was like something that I don't know, maybe AI generated or whatever it's
mhm.
made up. Or two, to be perfectly honest, sometimes stories do start to generate, and maybe a blogger will jump on it without fully, but a journalist is going to cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and that takes time, which means you might not see the fully fleshed out version of that story for a little while. But again, it feels so good because the other thing that everybody wants to do is like be in on the know. I was there
Hmm.
first and I understood that. So this is what's happening. It's like, well, no, and that's not really the whole story.
Well, I guess as we kind of close this out, Jenna, what'd you think of the show overall? Like, what was your take?
I thought it was very, very heartwarming. It made me miss working in a team as much as I love you, Dom.
Yeah.
But there was something about working. I don't know. I mean, first of all, one of the things that I remember saying to you, and I think I thought when this show I first heard that it was going to exist, was A, how are they going to be able to completely capture what it's like working in a news organization? Um, and that one is that part of what made to me the office so accessible is that everybody's worked in an office, so that's like a universal experience to different degrees or whatever. But I don't know, like a newspaper is it's a very specific kind of environment, and or a news organization, and so is that something they're going to be able to capture? And for the most part I think they did. And you know I know Ned's not necessarily the principal of the show, but I think what I liked most about his character is that there's never been a news organization that I haven't worked for that didn't have basically that personality type, that
Mm.
cheerleader who's just like, come on, guys, we
Hmm.
can.
Hmm.
We're going to try
Hmm.
harder and do
Hmm.
more and keep going. And I know you're exhausted and you need a break, but come on, like that part of it was very, very heartwarming to me because I've had numerous EPs who fit that bill. And that just grabbed at my heartstrings.
I love that. I Loved it. I watched the show. I think I watched it twice. The first time I watched it through was just more so of like how did I feel about it, like just to get a vibe for it, not go into it taking notes. And then the second time I watched it a second time to take notes, and I found it so much even funnier the second time around because I thought which is weird because I'm taking notes, but I'm like laughing at it because I'm like, this is a good one. I'm like, and we didn't even touch on everything within here. I mean, it's difficult. We had said, like I said before, like, it's tough to capture the entire show. You want people to watch it, but I do think that for me, I felt like it really did. It's a comedy, and I thought it was funny. I love this perspective of going out there and wanting to basically give a glimpse into an industry that has no that really people don't know that much about. I mean, we know what we do know is the public, like from a lot of public polls, people don't like journalists and they don't trust them. So I think it's interesting to take an industry that has so much little respect from a lot of people or a lot of,
I
trust.
think people think they don't like journalists because, again, depending on what kind of work that we do, they do like and they do trust. I don't think people like being pushed. I don't think they like, I certainly know that nobody likes being held to account.
But no, but I mean to say though, but I think everybody gets lobbed into this one field. So people, and I think what's great is they're showing a different side of the industry that people might not see. Again, it's not the newsroom, which is a big cable channel. It's not the morning show, which is a glitzy, morning show. It is a small newsroom where people dress in regular clothes and are not, struggling and are not covering. There's no like major storyline that's kind of like crazy. You don't have like
Well,
political
maybe they got
intrigue.
renewed for season two. Maybe we'll see
Maybe that'll
that.
be
Like,
season two.
it could be
Yes.
so, and again, because this is a local newsroom, it could be something as simple as just like one of them is following the intrigue of the local school board. That's the kind of
And that's
information that your local journalism can bring to you, provided it even exists anymore.
avian exists. But with here, what I really thought was fascinating is the fact that they're looking at it from the perspective of even just setting up the basics of what journalism means. Again, sourcing these aspects of the job that I think people it is important for us to understand news better. It is important for us to understand where we're reading from matters. If it's a blog, versus a paper with actual, with somebody like you said, a journalist who's, editing and kind of, going over the stories, what's factual, going over the facts and going over the proper aspects of the field and versus somebody who just copy and paste something. So I think there is a difference and I feel like it brought that out. So I that's what I took away from it. I found again very heartwarming. I love the characters. I of course Esmeralda for me is hysterical. I love that character. I even love the fact that as much as a character she is in terms of being, she's the managing editor, I think, of the paper, and she does the online, but they make her so over the top in terms of she hates the direction Ned's going with the paper. She just wants to do what she's been doing, which is clickbait and sexy stories, just sexy, funny, and then like
Well,
I
but
want,
that's where a lot of the draw is, at least for attention. It's in the
yes,
sexy sort of like entertainment world, da, 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 which don't get me wrong, it plays a part, but it's not, that can't be, that's not, unless you're in Hollywood, that's not local news.
exactly. And also, it's a different part of this. So I loved all the characters on it. I think she was to me, I loved Ned. I agree with you. I think he's of course the heart of what you want in the newsroom. And again, same thing, like been lucky enough to actually work with people like that who do want to put out responsible reporting and who don't, who aren't just looking just for the headline. So yeah, I loved it, and I hope more people watch it. Again, it's like you said before, it's been renewed for a second season, so people are. And overall, here's the most important part: it's funny. It's
Well,
really
yeah,
funny.
exactly. No, it is. It's really funny. Um, yeah, it's I mean, I guess for me, it's really funny, but it was also very, very heartwarming.
Yeah.
Like it made me feel
Well,
all warm inside.
well, Jenna, that was a lot of fun. People, if they want to check out the paper, again, it's streaming the whole season, streaming on Peacock, so
You can
definitely go
binge
check it
it.
out. Um,
All right. Well, listen, I mean, as much as I will miss that, we still have our own show to develop and to grow, and maybe we can have our own cast of wacky characters
there
helping
we
us out.
go.
All right.
That's great.
All right. Well, this was so much fun to go through, but yeah, we got
Thanks
more
for
work to
hanging with
do
us. All right. Thanks, everyone.
later.